Hi, and welcome to Course 012, Why Church Buildings Matter. This is Tim Kuhl. I just want to thank you again for joining us. This course is being brought to you by the Council for Facility Stewardship, and this is part of a multiple workshop geared towards the importance of the condition of our facilities, why they matter, how they impact guests to our church buildings. And so we're going to take a little different approach today and to kind of define why church buildings as a whole matter and how they can impact both our church and our community. So, do church buildings matter? And if so, why? I wrote a book several years ago called Why Church Buildings Matter, the story of your space. I'm not ashamed to say that it's available on Amazon, so feel free to pick up a copy. But so what we're going to talk about today is geared a lot around what's in this book. So your church may be interested in getting this and trying to understand a little bit further. And this I hope will help spawn some new ideas for you to consider and even take back to your leadership team. So why do church buildings matter? Well, in my opinion, it's because people matter, which is why you can't start with the building. Too often when people think of their church building, they immediately want to gravitate to what color of carpet should we have? How tall is the steeple? They immediately jump to the building components instead of understanding that the building is a tool, a valuable tool, and we're going to talk about why it's such a valuable tool during this workshop. But let's evaluate it. It's important because people matter. And if people matter, then we can't start with the building. So where do we start? I'm going to give four kind of overarching areas of where we start. Churches need to have a clear vision, a ministry vision. Without the vision, frankly, there's no reason to have a building. And you might even be debated whether or not, if you don't have a vision, are you really a church, or are you just a gathering of people that enjoy each other? Having that clear vision then leads to stories. What stories are you going to communicate? What stories are you going to communicate to your community, both verbally and in nonverbal terms? How will you relate to them? That leads to what is the right tool? What's the tool that you need? That tool then leads to the best utilization of the tool to facilitate the ministry and communicate the story. The facility is the tool, and the tool is not the ministry. The tool is not the story, but the tool can impact both your ministry and your story. So, like DNA, each one of us, if you looked at your hands right now and looked at your thumbprint, your handprint, it's going to be unique from anybody else in your family, anybody else at your church, at your work. It's DNA. DNA creates this uniqueness. And every church in America is unique as well. Every church has its own DNA, its own culture, its own set of criteria that make it unique. There's no single church that's exactly like another church. And there are three primary components that make up uniqueness. The first is the people involved in your church. There are certain things about the people that make it unique. The second is the place, your location. And the third is your passion. And where those three intersect, that's your church. For example, if you are in Alaska, you do church differently than they do in Miami. So your place has a significant factor on your uniqueness. You, though, could have people that are in the exact same town and have different people that attend those churches. And so the place may be the same, but the people that attend. There also is huge differentiations in passion. One may be passionate for feeding the hungry, another one for seeker sensitive, other maybe in deep theological. So all of those things, none of them right or wrong, but each one of those at that intersection is kind of what makes your church unique. And so understanding that helps us then focus on what's the right tool once we understand our uniqueness. So I'm going to show you, and we're going to look at some pictures here in a minute, but what story does your facility tell? All facilities tell a story, whether you intend it or not. Anytime you have driven through a new town, a new community, my guess is you've seen buildings that say something to you. They evoke an emotion. There's something that resonates in you. You may not be conscious of it, but it does. You'll either get a positive feeling or a negative feeling, or one of I want to stop there, or it's like I don't care if I ever see the inside of that building. So all buildings are going to tell a story. The question is, are we intentional? If you recall back in course 011, we talked about intentionality, and intentionality doesn't always have to be more expensive, but it does need to be intentional. So your storytelling needs to be intentional. So I'm going to show you these pictures, and obviously you won't be able to yell out at me, or you can, I guess you can, I just won't be able to hear it. But what story do these images tell? Think about being brand new to this town, and you are driving by these facilities at 25, 30 miles an hour for the very first time. What emotions, what words immediately come to mind? So say them out loud, write them down real quick. What does this immediately bring to mind? I have heard in workshops people saying temporary, economical, some say unattractive, some say prudent. And so depending on your paradigm, and let me be sure to reiterate, there's no right or wrong with any of this. And the images are not meant to disparage anyone or any type of building, but we do need to understand the impact of the storytelling elements. This one, what immediately comes to your mind when you see this? For many people, I heard the same thing as it was an old warehouse, or it was it's plain looking. For me, I see the garage door on the side, which tells me that this probably was a warehouse, a mechanic shop. It was something else. Excuse me. So to me, I see redemptive engineering, something that maybe was being used for secular use is now used for spiritual impact. And so while the architecture itself does not necessarily thrill me, there's a redemptive part of it that is encouraging for me. How about this one? Does this jump out and say anything to you? For many people, it'll say traditional, downtown, old. I see it and I immediately think you have no parking. That's the first thing that pops into my mind. How about this one? This is in Europe, and my first thought is they have more money than brains. Sorry to say that, but it may evoke a different meaning to you, but it does communicate a story of something. And how about this one? My guess is most of you could drive around your town and you'd see a couple dozen like this. To me, this could be First Church of anything: Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist, United Church of Christ, you name it. It could be first of anything. And so when I look at it, having been a music major in college, I immediately think choir robes and hymnals. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. And how about this? This is a temporary building. I've had people say it looks like a circus tent. It looks like a bubble. Again, this is a functional structure that is used by some churches around the country. A lot of colleges and universities also use it as athletic facilities because of its quick nature to get it set up. And how about something like this? Something that maybe almost looks like a Kincaid picture. Our friends at Visionary Studios had designed this for Mariners Church out in California. And to me, this communicates a story of kind of a statement made to this community that originally had pretty much more austere black box type facilities that didn't communicate, quote, church to maybe a liturgical setting. And they had a number of Catholic people in the area. And so as an evangelical church, they felt like they were missing the opportunity to communicate to their neighbors that they were a church. And so this wedding chapel gave them the opportunity to do that. And then how about this? You may not be able to see it, but on the left-hand side there, that red object is actually a plane that is suspended in a building called the Hangar. This is a youth building for a large church in South Carolina. I've had people say it looks like a college campus or what. I find that's all great, and it does kind of look like that. But think through what was your first emotion when you saw it? So again, going back, all facilities tell a story, but is it congruent? This is the key part. Is it congruent with who you are? Is it congruent with who you say and think you are, which is different than who you are? Many times I will do an evaluation and analysis with a church, and they'll say, oh, you'll love coming to church on Sunday. Everyone's so friendly. And then I get there and no one greets me. I don't get a bulletin. No one shakes my hand. And so what they mean is we're a really friendly church to each other, but not necessarily to everybody else. So who you are and who you say and think you are can be two very different things. Is your facility congruent with what you believe, your vision and mission? For example, if your vision and mission is to create wells in Africa to be able to feed the hungry, and someone walks into your lobby and you have Italian marble floors and $10,000 chandeliers, then the building's no longer congruent with what that vision and mission is. Are you congruent with who you're trying to reach, i.e. your target market? If you reference back to one of the previous courses, we talked about how a target market isn't necessarily, it's not an exclusive kind of thing. What we're meaning by target market is where I spend the majority of my time and effort and where we're trying to really make the greatest impact into our community. So if your target is families with small children, is your facilities congruent with what that group of people are looking for their families? Is the facility safe? Is it clean? Is it easy to get to? Is the children's areas not very far from the worship areas? All of those become congruencies to that target market. Is it congruent with your community? I've seen too often where churches, particularly church planters, and I've got a real affinity toward church planters because my father was one, that will buy a really nice piece of land in a really great part of town. And then because they've spent so much on the land, they end up having to maybe go with a more austere building. Well, they put then an austere building in an area with very expensive homes. So now all of a sudden, you're no longer congruent with where your neighbors are. That actually can do the opposite for you and actually make you a repellent to your community instead of something attractional. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of step, and I need you to kind of stay with me here because we're going to step into some philosophical things related to how our church facilities change and how cultural economies change. This was, I'm going to be paraphrasing a lot of this from a TED Talk by Joseph Pine, who is the best-selling author of The Experience Economy. And so we're going to walk through how cultures have changed, how the economies of those cultures have changed, and now how that impacts our churches and our church facilities. So if you remember back to the agrarian societies, we traded commodities for commodities. I had pelts, you had goat cheese. I had milk, you had beef, and we traded those things for each other. So let me just give you kind of a something to think about. So if you went into your hometown where you live now and you went downtown and you tried to buy enough unroasted, unprocessed coffee beans to make 1 cup of coffee, just 1 cup of coffee, how much would you spend for that? Well, it's about 5 cents because you're not needing very many unroasted, unprocessed coffee beans to do that. So 5 cents. Well, the problem is then I've got to roast it, I've got to dry it, I've got to grind it, I've got to brew it. I've got all this work I've got to do to get that cup of coffee. So culturally, we started moving away from agrarian and into the industrial and the goods economy. So think back, Folgers Coffee or Maxwell House. There was a period of time you could go into just about any grocery store and buy those pre-ground and pre-roasted coffees for about the same price anywhere in the country. A little differentiation on various parts like California and whatnot, but I could get about the same thing. So how much would it cost if I had Folgers today and I was going to make 1 cup of coffee? It's about 25 cents. So why am I willing to spend almost 5 times more to get the same cup of coffee? Well, it boils down to convenience. I don't have to pick the beans. I don't have to grind them. I don't have to roast them. It's all done for me in a nice, neat container that I can buy at any grocery store. Well, the cultural economies then started to shift further, and we were looking for things that were more convenient. So along comes 7-Eleven, or if you're out in Colorado, you've got the Get and Go. They want you to get and go. And so, if you were to go to 7-Eleven and get a big gulp of coffee in the morning, in most parts of the country, you're going to pay $1.49 to $1.59. So now I've gone from 5 cents to 25 cents to $1.50 or more to get the same cup of coffee. Why am I willing to do that? Well, now not only is it already ground, it's already brewed. I'm using somebody else's cups. I don't have to clean up the mess when it's done. There's condiments there. It is truly convenient. I'm buying more convenience, and I'm serving myself through this whole process. Then along came a man who decided coffee needed to be done differently and spent a couple of years or an extended period of time in Europe at piazzas and said, oh, look, we can do coffee differently. And so America needs something better for coffee. And along comes Starbucks. So why would I spend $4.59 for a grande, non-fat, extra hot caramel macchiato? Not that I've ever bought one, but if I did, why would I spend now $4.50 for a cup of coffee? Well, it's right there on the screen. It's the experience. You think about going into a Starbucks, and we're now post-pandemic, so Starbucks are opening back up again. But you think about what it's like to go into a Starbucks, and you've got multiple kinds of lighting. You have multiple kinds of tables. You've got comfy chairs, you've got high tops, you've got family style tables. I can go in there, I can see lots of interesting people. I can get a little snack, I can get a breakfast sandwich if I want. It's an eclectic experience. If you ever go up and no one else is in the store and you order a coffee, they still will ask you your name. And it's not because they can't remember your name. They're asking your name so they can have a conversation with you that increases the experience with you. The other thing is, for $4.59, it is the cheapest rent I can pay, because Starbucks doesn't ask me to just get and go like you would at a convenience store. They're happy if I stay and linger. I could work there with free Wi-Fi for hours on end with my 1 cup of coffee. Again, it all builds to this sense of experience and community. But what we've seen over the last 10 to 12 years is more people are looking for something other than just a selfish experience. They're looking for something that their buying decisions can make a connection to someone else in the world and make a transformation in the world as well. Some of the fastest growing sectors in the internet world are those that are buy one, get one. Tom's Shoes may be the most popular for that. They had a story. You buy one pair of shoes, they give a pair of shoes away to a child in a third world country. Warby Parker does similar things with sunglasses. All of those on your screen have a similar type of buy one, get one. So now my purchasing decision isn't just because I like the product and it makes me feel good because it's a selfish thing for me. I'm also now touching someone else. And so we're finding, how does that bleed over into our churches? How does it bleed over into how we do our facilities and so on? Back in the medieval towns or even early English settlements, what was the center of culture? What was the center of every town? Well, in most of them, it was whatever the religious center was, the church, the synagogue, the temple, the mosque, whatever their faith community was, that was generally at the center of their physical town, which made it the center of culture. And it, in many cases, was one of the largest buildings in the entire town. In the book Pillars of the Earth by Ken Foyer, he talks more about how the church was truly the center of culture. Due to zoning and I think even some exclusionism by ourselves, we have lost that in many cases. And I think we as a church, as we start looking at this transformational economy, we need to be thinking about how do we become the center of culture again? And how do our buildings then get used as the center of culture and not just our Sunday morning temples? Churches have gone through some really interesting kind of times. Back in the 70s and 80s, the multi-purpose, what I'd refer to as multi-useless buildings became prominent. There was this theology going around that we could take the same building with a gym in the middle and classrooms wrapped around it, and we could plop it down in any city in America. Call it the gymnatorium, sanctinasium, whatever we wanted to call it. And it would work for any church of any denomination of any size. And it would be really inexpensive to build and very, very functional. And while I understand the reasoning behind it, and while I can see some of the rationale, the bottom line is not every church is cookie cutter. And this was nothing more than creating a cookie cutter church building. And there's not unique stories that are told by these type buildings in most cases. You lose that whole uniqueness of place and passion and people. And so most of the times these multi-purpose buildings became multi-useless because you couldn't make anybody happy. You had carpet on a gym floor, which was terrible for basketball. The women's ministry hated the basketball goals hanging from the ceilings. There's just a whole, your corridor space was horrific in these. It was basically creating cattle chutes all the way around the building. And so the multi-useless spaces, thankfully, have started to dwindle, and we're not seeing as much of that as people are realizing the need for the uniqueness of the building to be congruent with the uniqueness of the ministry and the community. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen in your communities lifestyle centers replacing interior malls. Here in Charlotte, where I live, we have about 5 or 6 malls. And right now, there's only one that's really thriving. And it's because it is in an area that is very affluent, and so many of the national stores like the Apple Store and Saks Fifth Avenue and whatnot are in that mall. But most of the other malls are suffering because developers have moved more towards these lifestyle centers, something that is what creates what's referred to as placemaking, where it is a destination for things other than just going inside a box that you can't see windows to look into. Developers have also found that by having more outdoor space, people are willing to shop longer, linger longer. They're willing, And we as a culture with this kind of transformational mentality are looking for more community. And so to have a lifestyle center that also has a green space where they can do movies, or you can watch kids play in grass, or a dog park or whatnot, people are more likely to want to go to those places than to pull up to a mall that you don't know what's behind that scary door and who else is in there. No sunshine. Even Walmart over the last several years has explored adding skylights in their aisleways because they know that the longer people can be in natural light, the longer they will shop. So you can start seeing how that transformational economy and the need for community is impacting how we're designing facilities. And this is going to bleed over into churches as well. So let's look at storytelling 101, because that's really kind of what we're talking about here is what story are your facilities communicating, both as people drive by, as they get into your parking lot. Here's another little assignment for you, is walk into a building, preferably a church building, but walk into a building, and if no one is there to speak a word, would you know what that organization stands for? Is there enough clues on the wall? Are there images? Are there words? Are there things that will tell the story even if no one is there to speak a word? So first impressions, again, going back to class 011, first impressions are so critical. And to really grasp that and grasp how your facilities are going to impact people, you need to maybe use some non-churchy terms. Is, who are your customers? And then who is your competition? And think through, how does your facility address those two groups of people? How do you best impact customers, and how do you mitigate the competition? And if you, again, go back to a previous session, competition is not another church. Competition are those other things that are experienced by people 7 days a week. So as you're looking at your facility, your church facility, be thinking through, how is the building going to help us be a tool to reach our community, to create a great first impression, and then build on a transformational economy that our church can then thrive in our community. So wrapping up, go through your facility. What story does your facility tell? One thing you could do is you could actually invite someone from your community that maybe has never been in your building and ask them to walk through it and give you a critique. What story does it tell? Again, our churches that become our home, we overlook things because we understand the heart of people, we understand the culture. But for someone that comes to your building for the very first time, there's going to be a story that's going to be communicated. And is that story going to be congruent with who you are and what you believe and what you stand for? Thank you for taking your time today. We trust that this has been helpful for you. Again, feel free to research our book, Why Church Buildings Matter. And on behalf of the Council for Facility Stewardship, thank you and have a great day.